What's up, guys? It's Tony from Streetball Strategies, where we use strategy to build your streetball legacy. Today we're talking about overtraining. What do I mean by overtraining? Well, I mean overtraining happens when you stop making progress, when you stop improving, usually because you're not giving yourself enough recovery time. Remember, our goal here is to make as much progress as we can in as little time possible. So think of this process as a cycle, okay? The cycle starts with training, with whatever activity that you choose to do that is going to elicit a improvement response. And then the second half of that cycle is rest and recovery. The cycle begins with whatever you choose to do to improve yourself, whether it's working out and training to physically get better, whether it is to watch game film, watch games, study games, read books, whatever it is you choose to do to make yourself mentally better, or whether it's to actually be on the court and practicing, or to actually play in games and use games to improve yourself. Whatever the activity is that you choose to do to try to make yourself better, it's important that you do that activity as best as you can, to the best of your ability, to give 100% effort and to find your ceiling as to how well you can do that activity, and hopefully push through that ceiling to get better. Now, once that activity is done, now we enter rest. And all rest is time, more specifically recovery time. And so if the first half of the cycle is the activity to elicit the improvement response, the second half of that cycle is recovery time, where most of that improvement comes from. So your body will adapt from the activity you just did. It will try and start to adapt within the performance of that activity, but the vast majority of improvement that is going to come from that activity is going to happen during your recovery time. So your body is amazing, and what it's going to do is it's going to assume that sometime in the future it's going to have to repeat the activity that you just did. And when it does, it wants that activity to be easier for you to do. And in order to do that, your body has to adapt to it. And it wants to become more efficient at doing that activity. So while you're resting and using that resting time as recovery, your body is adapting and building itself back up to get to the point where it was prior to you starting that activity. And assuming that you did that activity to the best of your ability and you found your ceiling and tried to push through it, your body is then going to try to build itself up and recover to do that activity more efficiently again next time. So it's important to think of activity and effort and rest and recovery as very sort of yin and yang. One can't really exist without the other, and the more imbalanced you keep the two, the better. But what can happen as streetball players is you're so passionate about the game and you're so passionate about getting better and wanting to play that we kind of short-change that cycle. We shorten it by having more activity than we do rest. And so ideally what we would do is we would lengthen that cycle. What I mean is, by lengthening it, we try to keep it in balance better by having it be as close to sort of 50% activity and effort and then 50% rest and recovery. That way we are in balance and we give our bodies enough time to recover from that activity, and then when we perform that activity again, we can do it even better. But if we shorten that cycle where we have activity, 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 and a little bit of rest, that is not providing us with enough recovery time in order to perform that activity again better the next time. So if we have a cycle where it's like 80% activity and then only 20% rest, we're not really providing our bodies with the opportunity to recover and thus improve. And when we continually shortchange that cycle, what happens is our improvement starts to lessen, our progress and growth starts to lessen, and maybe it sort of plateaus and then it just stays there. Or if you continue to shortchange that cycle, you'll notice a decrease in ability and progress. And that's what I'm talking about when I say overtraining. When you reach that plateau or you start to decrease, that's overtraining, and we're no longer improving as much as we can, as fast as we can. Now we are being a detriment to ourselves by pretty much running ourselves into the ground. And so using our time wisely is very important, because now we have the opportunity to balance out that cycle as much as possible, to train as hard as we can, and then we also have the time to recover then from that training in order to let our bodies grow and improve, so that we can train again and be better the next time, and so on and so on. So when it comes to in season, when we are on the court most often, so ideally what you would do in the summer is you would have some kind of cyclical kind of pattern of how you would have structured those activities in order to get better. So you have playing ball in games, you have practice, and you have training, and then you also have rest. So ideally what you would do is you would set up a pattern where you would play one day, practice one day, train one day, and sleep or rest one day. So, and then you would have that pattern, and you would repeat it over and over again. But because it's summertime and games take such high priority, you can fall into a pattern where you just play game after game after game, day after day after day, and you're not allowing yourself to get in the other parts of your game to improve yourself. So the more you're playing games, the less you're practicing, the less you're training, the less you're resting, and you want to do the best you can to keep those other three components of your training involved and as regular as possible. So it's not just all you do is play games and you never train and you never practice or you never rest. You want to try to keep those four things as regular as possible. It doesn't have to be something as extreme as you play games one day, the next day you rest, the next day you train, the next day you rest, the next day you practice, the next day you rest. It doesn't have to be like that. Ideally it would be, but especially for us who play in parts of the country and the world where we have to take into account that, winter is coming. We only have so much time in season to improve and get better. Resting every other day isn't really an option, because it's you're kind of throwing the balance off where you're resting so much when you could be playing or practicing or whatever. The point is that there has to be rest in order to recover someplace. And you're gonna have to listen to your body in order to determine when you should rest. So if you're in season and you're playing well, and say every week you're making improvements and getting better, that's great. The amount of rest you're getting at that point, use that as an indicator that your rest amount, your rest time is at a good place, as long as you're continuing to get better and making improvements. If you start to get to a point where that improvement slows or stops or starts to even decline, then examine the amount of time you're putting towards rest and recovery, and you may need to start to bump that up, because again, rest and recovery, that's what elicits improvement. And once that improvement stops, once it plateaus, once it starts to decrease, one of the first things you should look at is, are you resting enough, especially in season, because you can be dedicating yourself so much to putting so much time in on the court that recovery gets neglected because you're so passionate about getting better that you make the mistake of spending too much court time and not enough rest time in order to elicit that improving element. One last important point about in-season activity and how you can avoid overtraining during the on-season. When it comes to the topic of practice,
we talking about practice, not a game. We talking about practice.
Now, this is where I'm going to contradict myself a little bit by saying that during the season, when you're playing ball, when you're competing on a regular basis, as opposed to the off season when you're not very much at all, whatever skills that you are practicing during your practice session, learn how it feels to do those skills at 100% effort and 100% ability. Learn how that feels, get a feel for it, so that your body learns what it's like to perform that skill at 100% effort and 100% speed. Once you've done that though, once you've gone over a few repetitions of 100% speed and effort, back that effort off, back that intensity off a little bit. In season, you don't want to run your body into the ground. The trap we can fall into is in practice, in season, giving 100% effort, 100% intensity to every repetition of every skill and every drill that we do in practice. The problem with that is that maybe you have a game tomorrow, or maybe you have a game in a couple days and you're going to be on the court. Are you going to have enough recovery time after that practice in order to get back into game shape? Or are you going to have a game tomorrow and you're going to be feeling the effects of fatigue and wear and tear from the practice that you're putting in right now, where you're giving 100% effort and you're giving 100% intensity? Are you going to be worn down from this practice and not be able to play at 100% tomorrow or in a couple days? In the off season, that's perfectly fine because you don't have a game coming up that you need to be in game shape and game condition for. But in the on season, when you do have games coming and you do need to be in tip-top shape for those games, go ahead and practice and train, but you don't have to run your body into the ground while doing it. Back off the intensity, back off of the effort, just so you can get the feel, just so you can stay in shape. The game is when you go all out and you give everything you have. But if you run your body into the ground in training and in practice, you're not going to be able to give 100% of yourself in the games. So in training and practice, back off the intensity, back off of the effort a little bit, and essentially save yourself for the game. So to summarize, between your effort and your activities, you have rest and recovery, and recovery is the way your body adapts to the stress you're putting it through during that activity and that effort. And adapting to stress is what's known as improvement. And if we don't allow ourselves the time and the opportunity to recover from that stress and to adapt to it, we're going to limit how much we can improve and grow as basketball players. It's very easy to make the mistake of overtraining. It's just as easy to not even recognize that you're making the mistake of overtraining, especially the younger you are. But it's important when you're young to learn and teach yourself the self-discipline of rest and recovery, because it will benefit you as you grow and mature as a streetball player. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys value the idea of keeping your body fresh and making as much improvement as quickly as possible. If you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys like the ideas of streetball strategies and philosophies that go into making yourself better as a streetball player, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And make sure you guys hit that notification bell so that you're notified of all of my future videos. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next week.